what you think about the cross and resurrection has the power to impact everything in your belief and practice. So that's why we've been showing you these different lenses of the cross and resurrection. Keyword being lens. That lens is something that you look through and it kind of clarifies or sheds light on something. All of these lenses shed light on who Jesus is, who God is, how Jesus addresses the fundamental issues that we face in the world, all that stuff. First lens is, you know what? Atonement or forgiveness for sins. The basic problem is that humans in creation are suffering the consequences of sin. The bridge is that the cross and resurrection are God's grace given to us, grace being a word that means like love we don't necessarily fully deserve but are given nonetheless. The cross and resurrection equal grace and atonement for sins. And the resolution that we haven't fully experienced yet, but we're building towards as we believe in Jesus, follow him, and carry this message. The resolution is that humankind is forgiven and restored once and for all. Lens 2, freedom/victory. Main images is humanity and the world being liberated from something, where the first one is human beings being graciously forgiven and restored. This is human beings being and creation being liberated, because the fundamental problem is that humans are imprisoned to the forces of death and evil. It doesn't mean that sin is gone from this picture. It means that the fundamental issue that kind of relates to humans missing the mark is that we're now kind of subject, fragile to these forces of death and evil. And that's what we deal with day in and day out. Remember, this is all very practical. We feel it day in and day out. The fundamental problem with that, humans are imprisoned to the forces of death and evil. Bridge. The cross and resurrection are Jesus coming to the earth, and it is God's power overcoming death and evil. And then finally, the resolution is that humankind is freed and redeemed and empowered to live now and forever. Lens 3. Fundamental problem is that humans are lost in a broken world with absurd suffering. Bridge. The cross and resurrection is God with us. God's loving us and delivering us from suffering. And the resolution is that God's love, as demonstrated in Christ, heals and restores all creation. Again, we haven't fully experienced it yet, but that's what the cross and resurrection have initiated. Now, lens 4. This lens is called reconciliation. The fundamental problem is that humans' relationship with God is broken and they are estranged. The bridge is that the cross and resurrection equals God's reconciling love and hope for restored relationship and life. And the resolution is that God and humankind and the world are reconciled now and for all eternity. The greatest problem that we face is that we're disconnected. There's a broken relationship with God, which means that what we're supposed to be is united with God and each other in this really special, eternal relationship. But something happened. And now we're now feeling the weight of that estrangement from God. And here's where this lens is really important. What we're really burdened by daily is this sort of insecurity, this fear that we're not connected with God, that we're estranged, that we're not really close with God anymore. Much like we would in a human relationship when things are estranged. We may at a surface level not be thinking about it, but deep down, we struggle with it. when we're estranged or alienated from somebody we really care about. So because of this, we're lost and disconnected, lonely and afraid, and we're living accordingly. And the cross and resurrection address that. Because God shows in Jesus that God is willing to get in the flesh and extend kind of this reconciling love to us to confront the things that have been severing this relationship. God makes the first move, so to speak, to confront things like death and sin and evil so the relationship can be restored. And the cross and resurrection help us to believe that the relationship will be restored, and it will give us new life, and it will give the world new life. But here's the thing. As always, since the beginning of time, God won't force us to reconcile. The cross and resurrection is God saying, here I am. I love you. I want to restore this relationship, and I want to reconcile all things to me. So it's kind of our move. Here's one story that I'll kind of close with. We'll give you some scriptures to think on this, and I encourage you to read them. Please read them. But the best story that I can use to illustrate this is the story of the prodigal son in Luke 15. In that story, you may know, in Luke chapter 15, there's two sons and a father, and one son requests his inheritance before his father has died. The younger son does this. He gets his inheritance, he runs away, and he wastes all of it on extravagant living. He falls on really hard times. And from far away, there's this moment in the passage where he's pondering what it will look like to go back to his father. And there's where this lens comes in. His fundamental issue is that he wonders, what does my father think of me? How might he treat me? Where's our relationship at? Especially because I ran away with this inheritance. I didn't do good things with it. He wonders what it will look like if he returns. He even says, I'll have to say out loud, I don't deserve to be your son anymore. And I'll have to live there as a servant. But what happens? He gets to his father's estate, and his father makes the first move once he hits his property line, you can imagine. His father runs out to him, embraces him, and calls for all these party gestures to happen. He says, because my son was lost, but now he is found.